Basic narrative in this sense was that climate is controlled by the greenhouse effect.
To be clear, there is no credible scientist that thinks that climate is controlled by the greenhouse effect. Pretty sure most of them would say that most of our climate probably comes from the fucking sun. And there might be a ton of other effects downstream from that, but this, I feel like the phrasing of this is very pointed in a really retarded way. I think the great divorce idea is a good idea. I really wish that we could split off and make two different countries, because as funny as it is to see how retarded all this shit is, like we're severely kneecapping our future scientific research and everything based on a lot of these subhuman degenerate fucking like hellspawn demons.
This new report sitting here that has come out from your department, it's basically backing up what the president talked about so much on the campaign trail in terms of what his energy policy was going to look like and what he wanted to do, but also undo that President Biden and others had done when it comes to rolling back climate regulations. It argues that more carbon dioxide in the air is good for plant growth, that sea levels are not...
I remember seeing this a long time ago. Oh, what was this report? Where the guy literally was like, did you know that trees actually need... We watched this. Who was this on video? The trees actually breathe in carbon dioxide, so it's actually better for the... If you actually think about it, it's more green, not more carbon dioxide. Was it Jordan Peterson who said this? This well-known effect breaks the climate narrative. Wait, no shot. This can't all be on that point, right?
When you started to object to the narrative, what narrative were you objecting to and on what grounds? This is Backstage 92. What narrative were you objecting to and on what grounds were you objecting to?
You're touching on something that took me a while to understand. You know, Goebbels famously said, you know, if you tell a big enough lie and repeat it often enough, it'll become the truth. There's been a lot of that in this, but there are aspects of establishing the narrative, i.e. what makes something the truth, that I hadn't appreciated. So the narrative was the climate is determined by a greenhouse effect, and adding CO2 to it increases it, causes warming, and moreover, the natural greenhouse substances besides CO2, water vapor, clouds, upper-level clouds, will amplify whatever man does. Now, that immediately goes against Le Chatelier's principle, which says if you perturb a system and it is capable internally of counteracting it, it will. And our system is.
And you think that...
I don't know what the principle he cited is, but if he cited it accurately, nothing about what was said about climate that contradicts it. If you can counteract an effect inside the system, then it will counter... But the whole point about overloading certain gases onto the planet is that it wouldn't be able to internally counteract it, but okay.
That applies... Okay, so that's a very germane issue because...
Well, but let me...
Even if... Please go ahead.
Let me finish because, okay, so that was a little bit odd. You began wondering, where did these feedbacks come from? And immediately, people, including myself, started looking into the feedbacks and seeing whether there were any negative ones or how did it work. But underlying it, and this is what I learned, if you want to get a narrative established, the crucial thing is to pepper it with errors, questionable things, so that the critics will seize on that and not question the basic narrative. The basic narrative in this sense was that climate is controlled by the greenhouse effect. In point of fact, the Earth's climate system, which has many regions, but two distinct different regions are...
To be clear, there is no credible scientist that thinks that climate is controlled by the greenhouse effect. Pretty sure most of them would say that most of our climate probably comes from the fucking sun. And there might be a ton of other effects downstream from that, but this, I feel like the phrasing of this is very pointed in a really retarded way.
So the tropics, roughly the minus 30 to 30 degrees latitude, and the extratropics, outside of 30 degrees, plus or minus. They have very different dynamics. In the tropics, the crucial thing for the Earth, by the way, and this is a technicality and much harder to convey than saying that greenhouse gases are a blanket or that 97% of scientists agree. This is actually a technical issue. The Earth rotates. Now, people are aware of that. We have day and night. But the Earth, by the way, and this is a technicality and much harder to convey than saying that greenhouse gases are a blanket or that 97% of scientists agree. This is actually a technical issue. The Earth rotates. Now, people are aware of that. We have day and night. But there is something called the Coriolis effect. When you're on a rotating system, it gives rise to the appearance of forces that change the winds relative to the rotation. And the only component of the rotation is the component that is perpendicular to the surface. So at the pole, the rotation vector is perpendicular to the surface. At the equator, it's parallel to the surface. It's zero. And this gives you phenomenally different dynamics. So where you don't have a vertical component to the rotation vector, motions do what they do in the laboratory in small scale. If you have a temperature difference, it acts to wipe it out. And so if you look at the tropics, the temperatures at any surface are relatively flat. They don't vary much with latitude. On the other hand, you go to the mid-latitudes, extratropics, there the temperature varies a lot between the tropics and the pole. We know that. I mean, temperatures are cold at high latitudes. And if you look at changes in climate in the Earth's history, what they consist in is a tropics that stays relatively constant, And what changes is the temperature difference between the tropics and the pole. During the Ice Age, it was about 40 degrees centigrade. Today it was about 60. Today it's about 40. During 50 million years ago, something called the Eocene was about 20. And so that's all a function of what's going on outside the tropics. Within the tropics, the greenhouse effect is significant. But what determines the temperature change between the tropics and the pole has very little to do with the greenhouse effect. It is a dynamic phenomenon based on the fact that if you have a temperature difference with latitude, it generates instabilities. These instabilities take the form of the cyclonic and anticyclonic patterns that you see on the weather map. Now, the tropics are very different. I mean, even a casual look at a weather map, the systems that bring us weather travel from west to east at latitudes outside the tropics. Within the tropics...
This whole thing is him just explaining phenomenons with the weather or climate. But I don't think anybody disagrees with these. People talk about climate change, they're talking about the aggregate increase of surface temperatures as a result of overloading the atmosphere with types of gases that are causing an increase in the rise of surface temperatures that our environment can't naturally deal with. I don't know why he's just like, here's my random climatology textbook that I'm reading from.
They travel from east to west. The prevailing winds are opposite in the two sections. And we're saying that what changes due to the greenhouse effect, however you look at it, is amplified at the poles. That is not true. There's no physical basis for that statement. All they do is determine the starting point for where the temperature changes in mid-latitudes, and that's determined mainly by hydrodynamics. Okay, that's complicated to explain to someone. Mm-hmm, and yet it's the basis.
I don't think anything he said there has anything to do with contradicting climate change at all, though. Like, there are primary ways of determining what the surface temperature is, or there are all these other effects that determine climate, sure, but I don't know what that has to do with anything.
But claiming that these seemingly small numbers, they say if global mean temperature goes up 1.5 degrees, it's the end. That's based on it getting much bigger at high latitudes and determining that. But all 1.5 degrees at the equator would do, or in the greenhouse part of the Earth, is change the temperature everywhere by 1.5 degrees, which for most of us is less than the temperature change between breakfast and lunch.
Did you notice that?
Okay.
Big tech companies today are protect your and get
And so let me lay out the narrative and correct me if I've got it wrong. So first of all, the world at the moment is making a big deal out of climate and associating climate change with the greenhouse effect, the trapping of heat. Mm-hmm. And we're all associating the greenhouse effect with an increase in carbon dioxide. And at least initially, we were associating that increase in carbon dioxide with global warming. Mm-hmm. And then we've added the proposition that, well, not only will there be warming, say, of up to 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees by the end of the century, and maybe there's some variation in those predictions, but we're also looking at a system that's characterized by a variety of positive feedback loops. And the danger here is that a 1.5 degree increase might not be catastrophic, but that might trigger a sequence of cataclysmic events. We hear sometimes about the melting of the Greenland ice cap, for example.
Isn't 1.5, isn't that also supposed to be the most favorable change? I thought that the estimates were higher now, no?
The rapid rise in sea level that would occur as a consequence, the increase of temperatures at the poles, the release of methane as a consequence, let's say, of the permafrost thawing, and then a runaway greenhouse effect because of that. And you evinced some skepticism, about the whole narrative, but also, more particularly, and perhaps more importantly, you don't sound like you're a big fan of the idea of runaway positive feedback loops.
Oh, well, there are a lot of things enmeshed in what you've said. Even the 1.5 degree depends on the positive feedbacks. Otherwise, CO2 would be even less significant, much less significant. So those, you assume that water vapor increases and amplifies it, but the whole picture is one-dimensional. So, you'd have to know the area where water vapor is important. It goes through a mess of things. And we know now that that probably isn't occurring, even people who support the narrative. So you keep
that water vapor isn't amplifying carbon dioxide effects.
If it is, it has to be considered as part of an infrared feedback, and nobody has detected that is actually positive.
Love CO2.
And organizers.
We pump CO2 into greenhouses in order to get the plants to grow better. Right now in the atmosphere, the concentration
most strongly is the fact that since the year 2000, the world has greened by 15%, and primarily in semi-arid areas. So let's just walk through that for a second. So 15% is a lot. It's bigger than the entire landmass of the United States. And green is a lot different than brown or dead. And semi-arid means that plants are growing in places that are damn near deserts. And as far as I can tell, that's pretty much the opposite of what the climate apocalypse prognosticated. And more than that, I can't shake the suspicion, and I would love to be corrected on this if you can see somewhere that I'm wrong. Why the hell isn't that good news, especially when it's also allied with the fact that our crops are much more productive as a consequence too? So I can say, hey, look at this. It turns out that there's no more effective way of delivering fertilizer for plants worldwide than to burn fossil fuels.
Yeah, so let's back up on the science for a second first. So plants love CO2, right? We pump CO2 into greenhouses in order to get the plants to grow better. Right now in the atmosphere, the concentration is about 420 parts per million of CO2. We raise it to over 1,000 parts per million in greenhouses to help the plants grow. The CO2 not only lets them grow faster, but it lets them use water more efficiently. They don't have to open up the somata and lose water as much. You're 15% since 2000. If you'd asked me, I would have said it's more like 40% since the 1980s, right? So, yeah.
Isn't there a twinge of irony here that he's talking about how dramatically we change the atmosphere inside of a greenhouse in order to make plants grow in places? Isn't the implication there that you are dramatically changing the atmosphere such that your current environment is not suitable for those plants, but if you change it dramatically, it becomes suitable for those plants? Isn't that kind of like an argument in favor of a dramatic change in I guess, atmospheric conditions as well as other things that would be involved?
Yeah, things are going better on Earth since 1980, right? Something called the Lefaria Index has gone up. NASA produces maps that show this. They write press releases that show this, but somehow it's not really present in the media.
Okay, so how come we can't take the stance that carbon dioxide is a net good? Because that's such a
carbon dioxide,
he
a pollutant. And my criticisms of that. But I would say this. I do find it extraordinary that people call carbon dioxide a pollutant. Because as I understand it, plants don't grow without carbon dioxide, and you're talking about the Earth being much greener than it was. So I don't understand that. I've often asked the question, what about sunspot activity? Surely historically, when it comes to the planet heating up.
Like, why did the fucking retards in Texas drown? Like, are they stupid? Why didn't they just drink the water? You do know that water is essential for human beings to survive, right?
Accelerating. When it comes to the authors of this report, some people have raised questions about their findings. How did you personally select these authors? Why did you pick them?
Oh, I've been in the climate debate and discussion for over 20 years. So I know certainly a lot of people in that world. And I just made a list of who do I think are the true honest scientists. They follow the data and the facts where they lead them. They don't have a political agenda or a desired policy or a desired thing. They're just honest scientists. There's plenty of those.
Cool, great answer. Lots of substance. Every single person in this administration answers questions like a kid doing a book report on a book they didn't read. That's okay. Don't show me any more of this. We don't care about this.
But I made a list of about a dozen of them that I thought were very senior and very well.
I wonder how many of the people that we just watched are on this guy's fucking climate change report. Fuck me, dude.
Respected. I called the top 5 and everyone said yes.
Okay, so you personally called them up and said the 5 of you have been chosen to author this report.
Absolutely.
Because when it comes to those, there's some of them that have been cited in this. They write in the opening of it in terms of how this worked in the process here. The group began working in early April with a May 28 deadline to deliver a draft for internal department review. The short timeline and the technical nature of the material meant that we could not comprehensively review all topics. If it's this important and it's reshaped, because there's some climate scientists whose work was quoted in this report by the people that you handpicked who say,
I think the great divorce idea is a good idea. I really, 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 really wish that we could split off and make 2 different countries. Because as funny as it is to see how retarded all this shit is, like we're severely kneecapping our future scientific research and everything based on a lot of these subhuman degenerate fucking like hellspawn demons. The pulling out of the funding from so many of our schools for all of this research and shit is it's gonna hurt us in the future. We're not even gonna see it. We're not even gonna know. You're not even gonna know what you won't know in the future. And I'm okay. Like, let's just do the 50-50 split, and then we'll do a zero no borders or not a no borders, a zero immigration, full borders policy. Don't let anybody hop the fence. They can all be in East Germany forever and do their shit.